fabulous people! Welcome to the channel for all the babes who create their own life trends. My name is Anastasia, and as an American, yes, American do have different accents. I've been living in Europe and traveling Europe for over 10 years. Today, I want to share with you things you must know before traveling to Europe. These travel tips will be perfect for everyone who plans to travel to Europe for the first time, as well as those of you who frequently visits Europe. Now, before we begin, please remember to smack that like button. And if you are new to my channel and my vibe, and the vibe of this channel resonates with you, I invite you to subscribe. Alright, fabulous people, now let's get started. Alright, fabulous people, let's begin with something very important that you absolutely must know, and unfortunately something that I recently got to experience myself, and that is strikes in Europe. They do happen, and when they happen, they might cause a big disruption to your travel plans and just to your overall itinerary. What happened in my situation, I was coming back from Brussels to Rome and they announced a transportation strike. So when I arrived to the airport, it was a complete mess. There were thousands of people all over the place. Everyone was just trying to figure out what to do, where to go. People were running around, being late for their flights. And on top of that, they actually shut down the security checkpoint because there were already too many people there. So the entire security checkpoint was just shut down for 30 minutes. And then when they reopened it back up, there was another an hour and a half wait just to go through the security checkpoint. Needless to say, most people, including myself, were late for their flights. And then when I went back to hopefully reschedule the flight with the company I was flying with, they told me that the next available flight was only in the evening, and they did charge me for the change of flight. Similar situation happened to my friends when they were flying from London to Rome, and then the same exact situation, but just with trains, actually happened to my mom in Germany when she was visiting my brother. So this is something for you guys to be aware of. No, of course, it does not happen every week, but it does happen quite frequently in Europe. So this is something for you to be aware of, maybe to check ahead of time if there might be any strike in cities or countries you will be traveling to. And if you do find out, of course, don't panic. It's not the end of the world. Just give yourself plenty of time to arrive to the airport or to the train station or anywhere you need to be. And just be patient, guys. Unfortunately, this is part of traveling in Europe. Number 2, don't shy away from traveling Europe by train. As a matter of fact, I would strongly encourage you to do so, as trains in Europe are extremely efficient, convenient, easy to use, and relatively inexpensive compared to planes. You will not have to deal with arriving a couple of hours before checking, dealing with customs, paying for bags, etc. In my opinion, trains are as stress-free as traveling in Europe gets. One quick tip that I have for you, if you do decide to travel Europe by train, is that on some local trains, doors don't open automatically. So you have to press the button next to the door for it to open. I want to make sure that you guys are aware of this because I see a lot of time tourists just standing, looking at the door and not understanding why it's not opening. So make sure to always press that button if the doors are not opening automatically. And if you need a video on how to travel Italy by train, I'll make sure to leave you guys a link to it in the description down below. Also, please keep in mind that in some countries like Greece, the preferred way of traveling is by ferries. So I always recommend doing some research before traveling to a specific country in Europe, be it Italy, France, Spain, Greece, etc. And if you need a guide on Greek ferries, then I will leave a link for you to it as well in the description down below. Now, since we talked about trains, let me mention public transportation in Europe because it is excellent. Well, in most parts of Europe. I, for example, absolutely love using metro in Athens. It honestly looks like you're inside the museum. Or, for example, buses in Brussels, because I find them super efficient and excellent way to move around the city. Now, I know those of you who've been watching my videos on Rome, you guys know I'm not a big fan of public transportation in Rome, but overall, public transportation in Europe is an excellent and very easy and efficient way to move around the city. Now, guys, the next thing that you need to be prepared for is walking. A lot of walking. No matter which city or cities in Europe you decide to visit, just be prepared that you will be walking a lot. And the reason why you need to know this is to make sure to bring a good pair of walking shoes. Now, one of the biggest mistakes to avoid when packing for Europe is to pack a brand new pair of shoes. Please make sure that you wear them plenty of times prior to a trip to Europe. Otherwise, your feet will be destroyed. For more Europe packing tips and a specific Europe packing list, I have a video how not to look like a tourist while traveling to Europe that I will make sure to leave for you in the description down below. Next thing for us to discuss is credit cards, cash, tipping, all that good stuff. So let's begin with credit cards. Now, the use of credit cards will vary based on the country in Europe. For example, in Northern Europe, credit cards are much more acceptable and you will be able to pay pretty much for everything with a credit card. As a matter of fact, they do prefer for you to pay with a credit card. Now, when it comes to countries like, let's say, Italy, you still will not be able to leave a tip on a card. So if you do decide to tip your waiter, you will have to do it with cash. Now here there is a small exception that I absolutely must mention, and that is small towns and villages in Europe. I do recommend for you to have some cash on you when you travel to those destinations, because some of them will prefer for you to actually pay with cash. And sometimes also in those places, it might be a bit challenging finding an ATM. So I do recommend for you to have some cash on you prior to your visit to a small town or a village. Now, one thing also very quickly that I have to mention, and that is something so important, is the ATM use. Guys, please make sure that you do not use ATMs at the airports or ports or train stations, standalone ATMs, and that you only use bank ATMs. And finally, guys, make sure that prior to your trip to Europe, you call your bank and you notify them that you will be traveling to Europe, and sometimes they will even ask you which countries in Europe, because a lot of times what happens is that if you don't let your bank know and then you go traveling, as soon as your bank sees that foreign transaction coming through, they will block your card, and it does happen quite frequently. For example, just recently I had a styling client, and when he tried to pay for his purchases, his card of course got blocked, and he had to wait for quite a few hours until it was time for the US banks to reopen so he can call them and so they could unblock his card. So make sure you do that ahead of time to avoid any kind of disruptions or disappointments. All right, guys, I know this next topic is going to be sensitive, and I actually thought for quite some time how I'm going to present this, and honestly I know I'm going to get some heat for it because I'm going to discuss customer service. I will try to stay as neutral as possible because it honestly depends what you guys are used to. A European type of customer service is more about giving you that privacy, giving you your space, whereas American type of customer service, the one that I'm used to and all my fellow Americans are used to, would be considered a bit overbearing and just over the top for a lot of Europeans. So when you get here, just make sure that you are prepared, that a waiter is not going to come to your table multiple times to ask, how is everything? Is your food to your liking? No one is going to come and pour you another glass of wine or to ask you if you want another glass of wine. No one is going to approach you with a bill when you are not ready to pay or when you didn't ask for it. And that is something that I very much appreciate about Europe, is that no matter if you ordered a cup of coffee or a full meal, the table is yours. You can stay there for as long as you want, and no one is going to bring you a bill and kind of rush you to leave. That is not going to happen. The next travel advice that I have for you is to get yourself familiar with a 24-hour clock or military time. You have to remember, guys, that in Europe, they do not use AM or PM, and a lot of times Europeans will give you time using military time. So I would recommend to just get yourself familiar with it. Don't try to see a lot of European countries in one trip. That is a big travel mistake that I see so many people are making when they're traveling to Europe. What I would recommend instead is to focus on 1-2 countries, of course, depending on how long you plan on staying in Europe, and then to explore cities inside those countries. And if you guys want specific recommendations for traveling to Italy or traveling to Greece, I have videos on how to plan a trip to Italy and how to plan a trip to Greece. Then of course I will make sure to leave for you in the description down below. For those of you who are an adventurous type and want to drive in Europe, well, I have tons of quick little tips for you. Let's discuss driving in Europe versus driving in the US. Well, number one, roads in Europe are much more narrow and have more bends than in the US. The driving speed in most rural areas is actually lower, but higher on most of the highways. Street parking in Europe is rarely free in city centers, and the best way to pay for parking is through a parking app. Also, please keep in mind that fuel is more expensive in Europe than in the US, but prices will vary between European countries. So if you plan to travel Europe by car, I recommend checking in advance which countries have cheaper fuel and filling up your car before you cross the border. Alright guys, the next thing that you definitely need to know prior to traveling to Europe is that here most things will not be open 24/7. Especially if you plan on visiting small towns and villages, you have to keep in mind that most things will be closing early. And when I say early, I mean around 8 p.m. So that means you definitely need to pack the most important things with you, like medication for allergies or headache or any type of medication you might need here, because even pharmacies will be closing early. Yes, for example, in Rome, you can still find pharmacies that are open all night long, but there are just a few of them and they're spread out all over the city. So just to avoid any kind of unfortunate situation, I do recommend for you to bring all your medication from back home. And of course, the same goes for food. In Europe, most food places will be closed during the night. So if you need some kind of snacks, just make sure that you're buying those in advance and keeping them at your hotel or apartment, because it will be very, very difficult for you to find food here in Europe around 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. It's going to be pretty much mission impossible. And since we're on the subject of food, there is one very important thing that I absolutely have to mention, and that is eating at main European squares. Guys, let me tell you, no matter which city in Europe you decide to visit, I would avoid eating at those places. Drinking, yes, absolutely. You can get yourself Aperol Spritz or a glass of wine and enjoy the views. But eating, guys, I would definitely avoid it at all cost, because the food in those places will be at best mediocre, and the prices will be extremely high because you will be paying for the views. So grab yourself a drink, enjoy the views, but just please don't order yourself any food. You will be regretting it. One thing that you guys definitely need to do prior to traveling to Europe is to book everything in advance, especially if you plan on traveling to very popular destinations like London, Rome, Paris, etc. During the high season, which is pretty much year-round for those destinations. Everything will be sold out or booked out or reserved in advance. So to avoid any type of disappointment, make sure that you're booking everything: restaurants, museums, sites, tours, Airbnbs, hotels. Every single thing should be booked in advance. The next thing that you and I should definitely discuss is pickpocketing. And yes, it is a very serious issue here in Europe and something that you absolutely must be aware of. Of course, that will all depend on the country or countries that you will be traveling to in Europe. But overall, what I ask and recommend is to make sure that you're always aware of your surroundings and belongings. And if someone comes up to you on the street trying to engage into any kind of conversation or offering their help or trying to sell you a service or a product or a bottle of water or a rose or a bracelet, just do not engage, guys. Just keep on walking. That is the best and the safest thing you can do for yourself. And of course, I go into great details on all of those things in my video, How Safe is Rome in 2023. And I know that video is very specific for Rome, but trust me, you will get a very good idea of things you might want to avoid in Europe in general. I would also get yourself familiar with kilograms, meters, liters, and Celsius when it comes to temperature. And of course, guys, there are so many great apps for it, so it's not like you have to really understand, but remember, that is what we use here in Europe. And also, guys, just please remember that during your Europe vacation, you will encounter some major and minor differences between the US and Europe. And just to name a few, most of the cars in Europe will have manual transmissions, and if you want ice in your water, you have to ask for it because it is quite rare here in Europe. And you will see way more people smoking in Europe than the US. So those kind of things, I know that might be a bit strange to you at first, but remember, you're on a completely different continent. So of course, things here will be done in a different way. Finally, guys, please remember that every single country in Europe will have its own culture, history, language, and food. Traveling to Spain will look very differently than traveling to Belgium. Traveling to Italy will be a completely different experience than traveling to Greece. Well, except for the months of August when it feels like entire Italy just moves to Greece. But besides that, please keep this in mind when you start planning your vacation to Europe. I would recommend to get yourself familiar with each country in Europe you plan on visiting, with its public transportation system, traditional food, way of life, different sites you plan on visiting, and just history and culture in general, so you really get yourself immersed into that experience. And remember that this kind of basic knowledge will be essential for your stress-free vacation. And of course, guys, if you plan on traveling to Italy, I welcome you to use my travel agency for all your travel needs. Everything from customized itineraries and VIP concierge service to booking food tours, sightseeing, shopping, private transportation, and much more. And of course, I will make sure to leave a link to my website in the description down below. All right, fabulous people, thank you so much for watching this video. I truly hope that this traveling abroad tips will be helpful for all your future international travels and that they will help you to avoid some travel mistakes in Europe. Now, before you go and start packing for your trips, please remember to smack that like button. And if you're new to my channel and my vibe, and the vibe of this channel resonates with you, I truly hope that you'll subscribe, and I will see you all in my next video.